to Lois Lowry.
Thank you. I see some familiar faces of people who were here earlier when I spoke, so I hope I won't be too repetitive, but there are things that people are interested in that I can't leave out. So how did you get the idea for the giver? I have to go through that again because that's the question everybody wants to know. Even taxi drivers have asked me that question. I'll start with a little background. These are my parents being married in 1933. My father was a son of Norwegian immigrants from Wisconsin. But when he graduated from dental school in Wisconsin at Marquette and opened a dental practice, I should add that his father died when he was in high school, so he was supporting his mother and little sister. And when he graduated from dental school and opened a dental practice in 1930, guess what? Nobody could afford to go to a dentist in 1930. Or if they went to the dentist, they couldn't pay him. And so he couldn't make a living. And at that time, there was one opening in the United States Army for a dentist. And a lot of dentists took the exam, and my dad got the spot. He never had in his mind at all to be an Army person, a military guy. But he suddenly found himself in the Army, which provided an income and benefits, I suppose. But he had to go and actually learn to ride horseback, things like that, back in those days. And he did all of that at the Army War College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. My mother thought of herself, she said, told me much later, as a spinster. She was 27, and all her friends had gotten married, and she was a kindergarten teacher in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, living with her parents. Her father was the bank president of the only bank in town. And she met my dad when he was stationed there, and they were married in 1933. And for that reason, my sister was born in Atlanta, Georgia, and then I was born in Honolulu in 1937. You don't need to do the quick math, it makes me 73 years old. And later we had a little brother. So here we are in Honolulu, and here is my Norwegian grandmother on the beach with me in Waikiki. And if those, many of you perhaps have visited Waikiki and know what it looks like now, with one hotel after another, and the beach filled with Japanese tourists. I know because I've been there not that long ago. But in that time, the beach was empty, and there were no hotels except the Royal Hawaiian, which was a little pink hotel. Anyway, my Norwegian grandmother, widowed lady, came all the way by train across the country and then by ship to Honolulu and lived with us when I was an infant and a toddler, until we left Hawaii shortly before Pearl Harbor was bombed. The reason this is a crummy photograph is because it was taken from a home movie. My father was a camera nut and a very good photographer. And so when we were children, in those days before television, it was always very exciting if we could get Daddy to show the movies. And we would look at ourselves once again lying on the beach, and if we were really good, Daddy would show them backwards. And so we would watch Mother pouring the orange juice into our glasses, and then we would watch the orange juice leaping out of our glasses back into the pitcher. It's kind of an innocent time, you know, before technology. At any rate, this was one of those old home movies. Me playing on the beach with my grandmother, wearing a dress and a hat, incidentally. And then I became aware, I live in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and about the time of my father's 75th birthday, I became aware that those old movies were deteriorating, and I took them to somebody at MIT who had them made into videotapes, and I gave them to my father for his 75th birthday. But I kept one for myself and gave one to my brother, and I photographed this from my own TV set. So more about this picture, I think, in a minute. I believe I've put something more on here. But here we are by now in New York, and me starting kindergarten, and my sister probably 3 years older, probably starting 3rd grade. Back in those days when little girls wore dresses to school, as my own daughters did. I don't know when that all changed, but we were just over here talking about ironing. Remember ironing? And I'm sure my mother did, but I certainly did too. My little girls wore dresses that incidentally I made for them. Remember sewing? And then we wash and iron them. And starch. Remember starch? Here, of course, is the photograph of Pearl Harbor being bombed in 1941. By then, we were living in New York. My father had been transferred to New York, and we were living in Brooklyn. My last name was Hammersberg, my father's Norwegian name. And I mention that only because I think there's a picture coming up with my name on it. I remember the day Pearl Harbor was bombed. I remember my mother hearing it on the radio. It was a Sunday, of course. My father was wearing civilian clothes, and he was outside on the sidewalk in front of our house in Brooklyn, about to get into our car. And Mother heard it on the radio, and she said something to me, I don't remember what, but I ran out and said, Daddy, Mama heard something on the radio, and you have to put your uniform on. So I've never found a way to research this, and it's not really important, but my guess is that when they made the announcement that day of the bombing of Pearl Harbor, they said if you're in the military, you have to be in uniform. This is the paperback copy of the book Autumn Street. I don't dislike this cover, but I like the more abstract cover better on the hardcover of this book. Those of you who are familiar with The Giver know that it also has a sled in it, and the sled in this book is important. Somebody's going to do a doctoral thesis sometime, a master's thesis, sled as a metaphor, and it's going to have Citizen Kane and this book, and it's going to have and I found it in an antique store in Maine. I have a house in Maine, an old farmhouse where I spend summers, and in an antique store not far from my house in Maine, I found an old red sled, paint's coming off. I have it in the living room of my house in Maine. But this book is set in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and it's about the period of time when we lived with my grandparents there. My baby brother had been born. Actually, he's born in this book. Should I tell this story? Okay, I will. When my first book was published, A Summer to Die, these two are my two autobiographical books, and they both deal with very sad subjects. Childhood friend was murdered in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. It was a black child. It was a little girl, and it was the granddaughter of my grandparents' cook. I made it a boy in the book. I'm not sure why I did. I've often, on being asked, explained that the book is so populated with females that I thought it important to have a boy. But I think probably it was more as a way of distancing myself from a memory that's still painful. But at any rate, the real child was a girl named Gloria. And so that's what this book is about. And A Summer to Die is about the death of my own sister when we were both young. When A Summer to Die was published, it was my first book for young people. And I was writing it, and I had written about 5 chapters. And I realized that something was going wrong with it, and I wasn't sure what. And I was new to this, and I did not know. I had been asked to write this book by a publisher, but I did not know that, having been invited to write it, I could easily have called up the editor, this is before email, and said, would you look at this and see what's wrong, because I feel something's wrong and I don't know what. And she would have been very experienced and would have explained to me what was wrong. I didn't know I could do that. I sat there suffering in silence, trying to figure out myself what was wrong, and maybe it was better that I did figure it out myself. The problem was that I had recreated the family. The girls in the book are 13 and 15. The little brother was, he's 6 years younger than I, so he was 7.